All right, guys, this is John. I'm over here with Jesse at the Canon booth. We are first arguing and later discussing, sort of peacefully here, what the C300 Mark II means to an independent filmmaker. This is a 4K sensor. It's not new, but we had, I think, a new conversation about why it matters and why to not get mired in the math of what your camera is supposed to do and talk about what it does. So I'm just going to let Jesse kind of walk us through why this could be the best independent filmmaker's 4K camera on the market now.
Yeah, so although it's called a C300 Mark II, there is nothing that's the same about this camera other than the fact that it says Canon on it. So it's a new sensor, new image processing, new codec, new power, new exhaust, new audio. So everything's different. So the sensor is, again, like you said, a 4K sensor, but it does 15 stops of dynamic range. The original sensor was 12. So you're getting 3 extra stops, 2 in the highlight, 1 to the shadow.
Let's talk about that for a second. So what is that 2 extra stops on the top end where I'm most concerned with it? Because the bottom end is handled by your crazy Canon ISO. But what do the 2 extra stops on the high end do to whites and to roll off and clipping?
Yeah, so since the launch of the C300, I'm part of a team that basically the primary function of what we do is to get information from actual end users and bring it back to engineers directly. One of the biggest things that people have been saying about digital since the beginning was highlight roll-off. So it wasn't just about extending the dynamic range into those the two highlight stops, but rolling it off smoother. So the sensor's been tuned in its amplification and design to make that roll-off less sharp, to be more filmic. And that extends into, since the original C300, the grain quality. Canon realized early on, basing the camera on film, on emulsion, that it's not about getting rid of grain, it's about making the grain look pleasing when it appears. So we have designed our sensors to have what's called a dynamic amplification. For example, if a diode is just getting black, it's not just going to spit out zeros, it's not just going to be stagnant, it's going to fluctuate, and the amplification is going to randomize and move so that the grain dances like film. So even when grain appears, it's something that's more pleasing to the eye.
What else is new on this camera that you think kind of sets it over the top? I mean, I think what we're talking about is an FS7 competitor here that is a little bit more expensive, that has probably a lot better low light functionality. You claim that it now has a very different way of treating the image in terms of giving it a much more filmic look. If this is an F7 competitor, why is this better than an FS7?
Sure, so the big thing is, if we again compare it to the C300, its predecessor, that camera was an 8-bit, 50 megabit per second camera. And even at 8-bit, 50 megabits per second, the Canon color science and the way that we placed that information was gorgeous. Canon log was gorgeous. Now we're talking about 4K, 10-bit, 410 megabits per second at 422 with Canon log 2. So you got a new sensor with a new log curve and an enormous bit rate. I mean, the amount of information we're juicing off the sensor is just, it's incredible. So you're still maintaining that Canon color science that we were employing in the C300, but now we're just juicing the sensor about 8 times more just over on the bit rate. So we're really just blowing the stops off what we were able to do with the C300, and that's the dual digit processors. We have 2 processors in this camera now versus the 1 in the C300. That gives us the ability to get that 15 stops, that high data rate, your 2K 12-bit RGB 444, but also that dual pixel autofocus across 80% of the sensor with face recognition, with a movable focus field, so that when you're shooting 4K and you can't monitor in 4K, you actually have focus assistance. There's also a dual pixel focus assist, so if you follow me on this one, it's a little hard to wrap your head around. Imagine you're shooting the camera in manual focus, and you still want something assisting you. What we do is we employ a box on the screen, a small box with 2 arrows, and when you pull the focus barrel, those arrows converge, and when they line up, that box turns green. So you're full manual, you're not shooting auto, but it's giving you a visual representation of what's in focus, because as you and I know, I don't want to be on autofocus all the time. I want to rack, I want to pull my own focus, even if I'm my own focus puller. So we're offering that assistance function, because if you're racking, if you're racking a 1.4 lens in 4K, you better be spot on. And we want to give that assistance function. That's the processor, right? That's the brain of the camera. That's juicing out not just the imaging information, but all that assist. And then you add to it the 24-bit audio, up from the 16. We're even expanding the audio qualities. To answer your question, when you're talking about the camera in its really competitive category, what makes me proud about it is that it didn't ignore the independent feature film narrative filmmaker or the documentary filmmaker. So yes, you got 15 stops. You got 4K at 410 megabits. You got the 12-bit RGB 444 and 2K. But you also have 10 stops of ND filtration. You still have the built-in EVF. You still have the small form factor. The fact that I can run this camera off of a small battery that I can fit in my pocket. I don't need an Anton Bauer on the back, right? So it didn't ignore the documentary shooter because, quite frankly, that's where this camera has really shined and rented and been used the most in the market is doc.
Well, it's also been used, or its predecessor at least, for Blue Ruin. So it's made its way into feature films. It hasn't been lost in the actual long-form narrative format. I guess the next question I would have is, what's the wrapper on this? What codec are we pushing this thing out at?
Sure, so it's a brand new codec. It's XF AVC. It still has an MXF wrapper, so it plays really well with the editing systems. Today, Premiere supports every format that this camera spits out natively, so you don't have to transcode. And that's great because it gives a lot of organizations that have purchased many C300s and are looking to evolve the system the ability to play with this camera and still, as long as they have the processing power, not have to completely change their NLE or download a bunch of plugins. As long as you have the latest version, especially of Creative Cloud, you're off and running.
What about Final Cut X?
Final Cut, you just need a plugin. And we're always, right now, Final Cut supports most of the frame rates out of the camera, and we're still in development with them, talking constantly. We have a very close relationship with Avid, Final Cut, Adobe, all those companies. And we will get support through Final Cut. You just download a plugin off our website, it's free, and then you're off and running.
What about our frame rates on this?
Yeah, so at 4K, 10-bit 422, it goes up to 30p. 2K 10-bit 422 up to 60p. And then if you do about a 2 times crop into the sensor, you could do 2K up to 120 frames.
So a 2x crop, 2K, 120 frames per second. Is there a 120 no crop HD?
No, yeah. So once you go beyond 60, you're cropping into the sensor. One of the things that a lot of people don't talk about with this camera is I could shoot 4K on board. I can record proxies to my SD card, which is the same spec as a C100 Mark II. I could do 2K or HD, 420 8-bit to my SD card, while doing 4K internal, while spitting out 4K RAW, all at the same time. So if I want to go RAW or convert to ProRes or capture straight RAW, get my internal recording and a proxy, I could do that all at once.
So you can have a crazy fast workflow, especially for journalism. We're talking about the Vices of the world. This is going to be their kitty. Like, this is where they're going to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, taking it back to Blue Ruin with Jeremy Saulnier, the thing, other than his incredible talent, his ability to write and tell a story and shoot it, he realized he had worked on so many films that were that 17-day feature film production schedule. And he said to himself, you know what, if I buy a C300, I learn the camera in and out, and I extend my shooting time to a month because I'm operating, I'm DPing, I'm directing, now I have the time to actually tell my story. I'm not renting something and throwing all this cash at a 1 month long rental. He was able to tell that story. So at the time, when the C300 launched, it was $15,999, right? It was around the $16,000 price range. We're still trying to keep this camera at a place where it holds its value. It's an item you can buy, and for the lifetime of the product, for a certain number of years, not just 1 year, but a few years, it'll hold that value as an owner-operator. But also, you can shoot a project for more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and be able to use this camera to, tell a story a little bit slower because you own the product. So it's a matter of really finding that sweet spot for the owner-operators, the rental houses, everyone, the markets that this camera serves.
I'll tell you, the one thing that is really never spoken about when people are kind of talking and addressing the independent film market is the 0% financing that Canon offers on these cameras, which is pretty amazing. Is that still in effect?
It is. So it's a 0% financing for 2 years, and that's, Canon has a unilateral pricing. You go to your preferred dealer, any dealer that carries our Cinema EOS products, or direct through us, and you have the advantage of the 0% 2-year financing. If approved, you have that option.
Oh, you got to get approved.
Right. Yeah, financing. Yeah. You can't have a stolen credit card or anything like that. You got to be.
We're out. We're out. We're a startup. We don't qualify. All right. Well, listen, Jesse. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I want to actually get some real time with this camera in my hands personally in our office. I would love for you to come by when you have it, and we can work on it together and kind of talk about it. I really want to see what that fall off looks like in practical terms, not in beep boop 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 language.
Right.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Have a good one.
Take it easy.